The day Sarah received the news of Michael's death felt like any other at first. The sun was shining brightly as she stood at the kitchen counter, flipping pancakes for her daughter, Ella, who was eagerly waiting for her breakfast. It was the kind of morning that made life feel simple, an ordinary, peaceful morning. The kind of morning that felt like it would stretch on forever. Little did Sarah know, the phone call that would soon shatter her world was already waiting for her. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the air. Sarah's hand froze over the pancake batter. She didn't recognize the number, but that wasn't unusual. She'd been getting calls from the military on and off ever since Michael had been deployed to Afghanistan. It wasn't uncommon for them to check in on her, give updates, or pass along some small piece of information about Michael's safety. But this call felt different, somehow. She could feel the weight of it pressing on her chest before she even answered. "Hello?" she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mrs. Foster," the voice on the other end asked, and there was an unspoken heaviness in the question. "Yes, this is she," Sarah replied, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter, the sound of Ella's small feet tapping against the floor in the background. "I'm afraid I have some tragic news. Your husband, Sergeant Michael Foster, was killed in action in Afghanistan. He died in a firefight on the outskirts of Kandahar. I'm so sorry to have to tell you this." The words hit Sarah like a truck, her mind scrambling to comprehend what she'd just heard. The world around her seemed to slow down, the sunlight from the window becoming blinding. The phone slipped from her hand and fell onto the floor with a dull thud. She didn't even hear it. Her vision blurred as she sank to her knees, a guttural sob escaping her chest. Ella's innocent voice calling from the living room, asking if breakfast was ready, felt miles away. Sarah had known this day could come. She had always known. Every time Michael kissed her goodbye before leaving on a deployment, she feared it could be the last time she saw him. But knowing it could happen and living through it were two very different things. Her husband, the man she loved, had been taken from her. And there was nothing she could do to bring him back. The next few days felt like an overwhelming blur. The military handled the funeral arrangements, and the town rallied around Sarah, offering condolences and support. But no matter how many people surrounded her, Sarah still felt utterly alone. There was a hollow space inside her that nothing could fill. Ella, who had adored her father, kept asking when he was coming home. Sarah didn't know how to explain it to her, how to make her understand that her daddy was gone forever. As the days passed, Sarah found herself going through the motions, attending the funeral, meeting with military officials, and accepting the endless stream of sympathy cards and meals from well-meaning friends. The house felt emptier with each passing day, and the silence weighed heavily on her. Michael's absence was a constant, unshakable presence. His things remained just where he'd left them, his boots by the door, his favorite jacket hanging in the closet, and his laptop resting on the desk in their bedroom. She had considered going through it, trying to find some sort of closure, but each time she thought about it, the idea seemed too overwhelming. One night, after Ella had gone to bed, Sarah found herself sitting in the quiet of the living room, staring at the flickering light of the television. She had no interest in watching anything. She wasn't sure why she had turned it on in the first place. Her mind was too preoccupied with thoughts of Michael, with the empty space he had left behind. Her gaze wandered toward their bedroom, where Michael's laptop sat untouched on the desk. It had been there for weeks, but she had never dared to open it. What if there was something there, something that would make the pain worse? What if he had left a message for her? What if he hadn't been as safe as she had hoped? The what-ifs danced in her mind, and before she knew it, Sarah found herself walking into the bedroom. She sat down at the desk and opened the laptop, her fingers trembling as she touched the keys. The screen flickered to life, and she was faced with the familiar desktop, a photo of their family taken just before Michael left for his last deployment. They looked so happy in the picture, Michael holding Ella while Sarah stood beside him, smiling. It felt like a lifetime ago. She hesitated, unsure of what to do next. She had always respected Michael's privacy. But now, it felt like she needed to know more. She needed something, anything, that could make sense of his death. With a deep breath, she clicked on the file labeled Documents, hoping to find something ordinary, something that would make her feel closer to him. The first few files were nothing out of the ordinary: old receipts, tax documents, and emails. But then, one file caught her eye. It was a folder labeled For Sarah. Her heart skipped a beat. She had never seen this folder before. It wasn't like Michael to keep anything from her, at least not anything important. Why hadn't she noticed it before? With a mixture of fear and anticipation, Sarah clicked on the folder. Inside, there was a single video file titled Message from Michael. Her stomach churned. This was it. This was what she had been waiting for, some final message from her husband, a piece of him that she could hold on to forever. She clicked play. The screen flickered, and Michael's face appeared. He was sitting in front of a military-grade tent, the background a blur of desert and dust. He looked different than the man Sarah had seen just a few months ago. There was something in his eyes, something heavy, that she hadn't noticed before. "Hey, babe," Michael's voice came through the speakers, low and warm. "I don't know when or if you'll ever see this, but if you're watching, then something's gone wrong. I need you to know a few things." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She leaned forward, gripping the edge of the desk as the video continued. "The mission I'm on right now, it's not what they told us. It's not what they told me. I've found something big. Something that could change everything. I can't tell you everything right now, but just know that I'm doing this for you. For us. I've always loved you, and I always will. I need you to promise me something, Sarah. When I'm gone, because I know I might not make it back, you need to dig. Don't let them cover this up. There's a secret out there, one that could get people hurt. I don't know what will happen, but if something happens to me, I need you to find the truth." The video flickered again, and Sarah could barely breathe as the words sank in. Michael had been keeping something from her, something huge. He hadn't just been fighting for his country, he had been fighting to expose a secret, a conspiracy of some kind. She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. But then, the video took a turn she hadn't expected. "Sarah," Michael continued, his voice shaking slightly. "You need to trust someone. There's someone in our town who might know more. If anything happens to me, go to them. They'll help you. I wish I could tell you more, but I can't. Just promise me you'll find the truth." The video ended abruptly, leaving Sarah sitting in stunned silence. She sat there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of Michael's words heavy on her chest. What had he gotten involved in? Who in their town could possibly know about this? Sarah had no answers, but one thing was clear: her husband's death had been far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. And now, she was about to be dragged into something that could change her life forever. The days following Michael's posthumous message felt like a fever dream. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of disorientation, of walking through her own life as though it were happening to someone else. The video had planted a seed of doubt in her mind, and now, it was all she could think about. Michael had been involved in something dangerous, something big enough that it had cost him his life. But why hadn't he told her? Why had he left this cryptic message, urging her to uncover a truth that he could never reveal? Ella's innocent laughter echoed through the house as Sarah moved through her daily routine, but there was an underlying tension that no one could see. Sarah was physically there, caring for her daughter, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept replaying Michael's words over and over again, trying to make sense of them. There's a secret out there, one that could get people hurt. What did that even mean? And who was the person Michael had mentioned? Who in their town could possibly be involved in something so serious that Michael had to risk everything to expose it? She couldn't keep pretending. She needed answers. She needed to know what had happened to her husband, why he had died, and why his last moments had been spent trying to uncover a conspiracy. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to leave it alone, to grieve, to heal, to move on. But another part of her, a part that she couldn't ignore, knew she couldn't just let it go. Michael had died for something important, and she wasn't going to allow his death to be in vain. The decision to start digging into Michael's secret was not an easy one. For days, she hesitated, torn between the need for closure and the fear of what she might find. But finally, on a rainy afternoon, she knew she couldn't wait any longer. Ella was at her grandmother's house, and the house felt unbearably empty. Sarah sat in front of Michael's laptop again, her heart pounding in her chest as she navigated through the files once more. The For Sarah folder seemed like a puzzle, one that she was determined to solve. The first file she opened was a set of emails, some sent just days before Michael's death. There were no messages from her husband, but there was something unsettling about the way the emails were worded. They were encrypted, written in a language Sarah didn't understand. Names, places, and dates flashed on the screen, but they all meant nothing to her. She scanned through them, searching for a clue, something that might make sense of the chaos. And then she found it, a reference to a meeting, one that had taken place just days before Michael had left for his final mission. The email mentioned a covert operation, one that involved the highest levels of government. There were no details, just a vague mention of a sensitive issue that had to be handled carefully. The words national security and intelligence were thrown around like they were nothing. Her stomach twisted as she read the lines over and over again. What had Michael gotten involved in? How deep had this secret gone? And why had he never told her? She had always thought of Michael as her rock, the man she could trust with everything. But this man, the one in the emails, seemed like a stranger to her. Sarah closed the laptop and sat back in the chair, her mind racing. She needed to understand what was happening, but she didn't know where to start. Michael's death had been tragic, but it was also the beginning of something much larger, something that now involved her. The next morning, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It was a paranoid thought, one she quickly dismissed, but as the day wore on, she couldn't escape it. The quiet whispers of the world outside her door seemed louder, more menacing, as though someone, somewhere, was waiting for her to make her next move. She had always been a private person, someone who kept her life to herself, but now, every glance felt like an intrusion. Every car that passed her house seemed too interested. Every person who crossed her path seemed to look at her like they knew something she didn't. Her phone rang, and she jumped, the sudden noise shattering the silence in the house. It was an unfamiliar number, but this time, she didn't hesitate to answer. "Hello?" she said, her voice steady despite the unease that had settled in her chest. "Mrs. Foster?" The voice on the other end was calm but strained, as though the person on the other end was carefully choosing their words. "I'm sorry to bother you, but we need to talk." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Who is this?" "My name is Adam Walker," the voice said, "and I knew your husband." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean, you knew him? Who are you?" "Please, just listen to me," Adam said, his voice urgent. "I don't have much time. I can't explain everything right now, but Michael was involved in something that's much bigger than you think. He was trying to expose something dangerous. And now, they're looking for anyone who knows too much. If you want answers, you need to meet me. They're coming for you." The line went dead before Sarah could respond. Her mind reeled. Who was this man? How did he know about Michael's secret? And what did he mean by, "they're coming for you"? She had no idea what to make of the call, but there was one thing she knew for sure, she couldn't ignore it. Someone out there had information about what Michael had been involved in, and that someone had just reached out to her. She was no longer just grieving her husband's death. She was caught up in something far more dangerous. Sarah knew she had to meet Adam, but she didn't know who she could trust. Who could she turn to? Was Adam just another piece of the puzzle, or was he part of something darker? She didn't have the answers, but she knew she couldn't sit idly by any longer. She had to know the truth. For Michael. For herself. And for Ella, who deserved to understand the kind of man her father had been. The decision was made. Sarah would meet Adam, but she would do so on her terms. She wasn't going to blindly follow someone she didn't know. She wasn't going to put herself in danger without knowing exactly what was at stake. But she couldn't keep living in the shadows, either. The truth was out there, and it was waiting for her to find it. The next few days passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Sarah kept a close watch on her surroundings, making sure to avoid any potential threats. She didn't know who might be watching, who might be listening, but she wasn't going to take any chances. She had a meeting with Adam arranged, a location carefully chosen for its anonymity. And as the day drew near, the weight of her decision began to settle in her chest. This was no longer just about uncovering Michael's secret. This was about survival. At the same time, her mind kept returning to that fateful day when she had opened Michael's laptop. What had he been trying to tell her? Why hadn't he been able to say it all? And what was the secret so dangerous that it had cost him everything? Her world had been irrevocably changed, and now, Sarah knew, there was no turning back. The air felt thick as Sarah pulled up to the parking lot of the small, nondescript cafe. The gray sky mirrored the anxiety she felt gnawing at her insides, and she had to fight the urge to turn around and drive back home. Her heart was pounding in her chest, her palms slick with sweat. She had never been in a situation like this before, caught between grief, fear, and an overwhelming need to understand the truth. She wasn't sure what kind of person Adam Walker was, but he was her only lead, the only thread connecting her to the mystery surrounding Michael's death. If she wanted answers, she had to meet him. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car, trying to steady her nerves. The cafe was quiet, with only a few scattered patrons nursing their coffee cups in silence. She spotted Adam immediately. He was seated in the back corner, his gaze flicking around nervously as he watched the entrance. He looked just as she had imagined, unkempt, disheveled, a man who had seen more than his fair share of trouble. The slight tremor in his hand as he raised a cup to his lips made it clear that he, too, was anxious about their meeting. As she approached, his eyes locked onto hers, and he gave her a small, almost apologetic smile. "Sarah?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Her throat felt dry, the words almost getting stuck as she tried to push them out. "Are you Adam?" He nodded, motioning for her to sit across from him. "Thanks for meeting me. I know this is sudden, but we don't have much time. There are people looking for you." She hesitated for a moment, then sat down. Her eyes darted around the cafe, scanning the faces of the people sitting at nearby tables. It was an instinct she had developed after years of living in a world where danger seemed always just a breath away. She wasn't sure who Adam was, but she knew that, for better or worse, he was the key to unlocking the mystery behind Michael's death. "I don't understand," Sarah began, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "How do you know about what happened to Michael? How do you know about the laptop?" Adam's face hardened, his gaze dropping to the table for a brief moment before he spoke. Michael wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just a man who went off to war and did his job. He was a part of something much bigger than any of us realized. Something that had been building for years, and he got caught in the middle of it. Sarah's stomach twisted. She had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud was different. Caught in the middle of what? Adam glanced around the cafe again, his eyes narrowing. He lowered his voice. I can't say too much here, but it has to do with a covert operation, one that was authorized by people who wanted to keep it hidden at all costs. People in positions of power. People who didn't want anyone to know the truth. Sarah's pulse quickened. She leaned forward, her voice barely audible. What truth? What was Michael involved in? Adam hesitated, looking as though he was weighing whether or not to tell her. Finally, he spoke, his words slow and deliberate. There's a plan, a project, really. Something that could change the course of everything. It's about weapons, military strategies, and alliances. And Michael. Michael was the one who found out about it. He got too close. He uncovered something that was never supposed to see the light of day. Sarah's mind was spinning. So, Michael was killed because he knew too much? Adam nodded grimly. That's the short version, yeah. They made it look like an accident. A tragic death in combat. But it wasn't an accident. It was murder, plain and simple. Her heart raced, and the room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in on her. But why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he trust me with the truth? Adam looked at her, his expression softening. I don't think he ever wanted you to know. He was trying to protect you, Sarah. He was trying to protect Ella. If you knew the truth, you'd be a target too. And he couldn't let that happen. He didn't want you to get caught up in the mess. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she fought them back. So, what now? What am I supposed to do? How do I even begin to understand all of this? Adam took a deep breath, his gaze turning serious. You need to get out of here. You need to leave town, Sarah. They're already looking for you, and if they find out you've seen me, it's only going to get worse. There's more to this than you can imagine. Michael wasn't the only one involved. And if they think you know too much, they'll stop at nothing to keep you quiet. Sarah felt her heart drop into her stomach. I can't just leave. I have a daughter. Ella needs me. I know, Adam said softly. But if you stay, you're putting her in danger too. I don't know how much time you have, but the longer you stay here, the more dangerous it becomes. She stared at him, the weight of his words pressing down on her. What am I supposed to do? I can't just disappear. You have to, he replied firmly. You need to get out of here, find a place to hide, and stay off the radar. You can't trust anyone right now. Not even the people you think you can rely on. Michael knew too much, and they will do anything to cover it up. A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine as she processed his words. She had never imagined her life could spiral into something like this, something so dangerous, so unpredictable. She had always thought her world was one of simplicity and love, where everything was within her control. But now, it was slipping through her fingers. She felt like a character in a spy thriller, only it wasn't fiction. This was her reality. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Adam took a deep breath, his eyes darting around the cafe once more. I can help you. I can get you out of town, but it's going to take some time. You can't trust anyone right now, not the police, not your friends. I know it's hard to believe, but it's the truth. Sarah felt her world crumbling around her, and for a moment, she simply sat there, stunned by the enormity of what Adam was saying. She had no idea who to trust, who to turn to. But one thing was certain, her life, and the life of her daughter, was now in danger. Michael's death was only the beginning of something much larger, something that was threatening to swallow them whole. The secrets he had uncovered were too dangerous to ignore, and now it was up to her to finish what he had started. The gravity of the situation hit her all at once, and she realized she had no choice. She had to act. She had to find the strength to protect herself and her daughter, even if it meant running from everything she knew. Michael had died for a cause, and now it was her turn to pick up the pieces. "I'll do whatever it takes," Sarah said, her voice shaky but determined. "I need to know what happened. I need to find out who is behind this." Adam gave her a solemn nod. "I'll help you. But we need to move fast. Time is running out." With that, Sarah felt her life take a sharp turn into the unknown. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: she was no longer just a grieving widow. She was a woman caught in a deadly game, and the stakes were higher than she ever could have imagined. Sarah had never thought of herself as someone who could go on the run. She had always been the steady, grounded type. The kind of person who believed that if she worked hard enough and followed the rules, she could keep her life in order. But now, her life was anything but orderly. Everything she knew, everything she believed in, was being torn apart. She had no choice but to trust Adam, even though every fiber of her being screamed that she should be more careful. He was the only person who seemed to have any answers, but even he couldn't offer complete assurance. He was a man with his own shadows, and the more Sarah learned, the more questions she had. The plan was simple, in theory. Adam had connections, people who could help them disappear, and she had to follow his lead. There was no time to waste. They had to act fast, before anyone realized she knew too much. The first step was getting out of town without anyone noticing. Sarah couldn't risk the authorities or anyone in her circle finding out. She had to leave everything behind. The morning they planned to leave, Sarah packed her things in silence. Ella was at school, and Sarah had decided it was better to keep her in the dark for as long as possible. How could she explain any of this to her? Her daughter didn't need to be burdened with the dangers lurking at every corner. But Sarah knew that once they left, there would be no turning back. The life she had built for herself, the life she had always taken for granted, would be gone forever. But that didn't matter. What mattered was keeping Ella safe. That was all that mattered now. Adam arrived at her house early that morning, looking over his shoulder nervously. He was wearing a baseball cap, trying to hide his identity, and it was clear he was more than a little jumpy. "We don't have much time," he said as soon as Sarah opened the door. "I'll drive. You just follow my lead." She nodded, grabbing the bag she'd packed, and quickly shut the door behind her. She didn't even bother to look back at the home she had shared with Michael. It was too painful, and there was no time for sentiment. As they drove through the winding roads of the town, Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss. Every familiar landmark, every shop she passed, felt like a piece of her old life slipping away. She had no idea where they were headed, only that it was far away from this place, far from anyone who could potentially recognize her. As they neared the outskirts of town, Adam pulled into a small, nondescript gas station. He parked the car and turned to Sarah. "You'll be safe here for a while. We'll get you set up, and then I'll check in with you every couple of days. Just stay put, don't make any calls, don't talk to anyone. You need to keep a low profile." Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. It wasn't that she didn't trust Adam, she did, to a degree, but the whole situation felt wrong. How had Michael's life led to this? How had his secrets put them both in this position? Adam could be trusted for now, but what about the others who were involved? What if someone was watching them even now, waiting for the right moment to strike? "I'm scared," Sarah admitted quietly, looking out the window as the world seemed to blur past them. She had never been so afraid in her life. She had never been so powerless. Adam gave her a hard look. "I know. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. But it's the only way." Sarah sighed. She wanted to argue, to say that this wasn't fair, that none of this made sense. But what good would it do? Nothing could change the past. The world she once knew was gone, and now she had to learn how to survive in a world that was full of uncertainty and danger. After a few minutes of silence, Adam spoke again. I've been in contact with some people who can help you. I'm not sure how much longer I can stay in the area. But I'll do what I can to make sure you're okay." Sarah nodded, though her mind was still racing. Every moment they spent here, waiting, felt like a missed opportunity to get answers. She needed to know more about what Michael had uncovered. What was it that had cost him his life? What had been so important that people were willing to kill to protect it? And most importantly, what did it have to do with her? "Adam," she said after a moment, "do you know what Michael found? I mean, I know you said it was something big. But what exactly was it? And why did he have to die for it?" Adam's face darkened. "It's complicated. I wish I could give you all the answers right now, but it's not that simple. What Michael stumbled onto was big. Really big. And if the wrong people find out that you know about it, you won't just be in danger. Your daughter will be too." Sarah's blood ran cold. "You're telling me this is about more than just Michael?" "Much more," Adam confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. "This goes beyond what you or I can understand. This is about power, control, and a whole network of people who will stop at nothing to keep things hidden. Michael was a pawn in something far larger than he ever realized. And when he started asking questions, they couldn't let him live." Sarah felt the weight of Adam's words sink in. It wasn't just about the military or a few corrupt officials. It was about something much bigger. Something with far-reaching implications. And now, she was part of it. Whether she wanted to be or not. She couldn't help but feel guilty. What had she missed? How had she not seen the signs? Michael had been distant in the months leading up to his death, but she had chalked it up to the stresses of his job. She never imagined that he was hiding something so dangerous. And now, it was her turn to carry the weight of his secret. They drove for hours, Adam taking care to avoid any towns or cities where they might be recognized. Sarah could feel herself growing more and more tense with every passing mile. She didn't know where they were going, but the further they got from home, the more isolated and vulnerable she felt. Eventually, Adam pulled off the highway onto a dirt road that wound its way into the trees. It was remote, quiet, and completely off the grid. "We're here," Adam said, parking the car in front of an old cabin that looked abandoned. The paint was chipped, and the windows were boarded up, giving the place an eerie, almost deserted feel. "This is where I'll leave you for a while. You'll be safe here, but you need to stay out of sight. Keep to yourself, and don't trust anyone who shows up. I'll be in touch." Sarah swallowed hard. She had no choice but to trust him. She couldn't afford not to. As she gathered her things and stepped out of the car, she took one last look at Adam. The uncertainty in his eyes mirrored her own, and she felt a pang of guilt. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want any of this. But she had no choice. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Adam nodded once, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before he turned and drove off, disappearing into the woods. Alone, Sarah stood in front of the cabin, the weight of her decisions crashing down on her. She had no idea what the future held, or if she would ever see her daughter again. But one thing was clear, she was in this now, deep in a web of secrets and lies, and there was no turning back. She could only hope that she would find the answers she needed before it was too late. Sarah sat in the quiet cabin, the silence surrounding her like a heavy blanket. Her eyes wandered across the room, taking in the worn furniture and the lack of modern comforts. The small wood-burning stove in the corner emitted a faint warmth, but it was the kind of solitude she had never known before. No neighbors. No distractions. Just the hum of her own thoughts, gnawing at her from every angle. She had been here for 2 days, and each passing hour seemed to stretch longer than the last. The isolation was suffocating, but she knew it was the only way to stay safe. Her mind raced, replaying everything that had happened since Michael's death. She couldn't escape the image of him, the man she had loved, the man who had held so many secrets she could never have imagined. The more she learned, the more she realized how little she truly knew him. How could he have been involved in something so dangerous? And how could she, his wife, have been so blind? In the dead of night, when the world outside seemed to breathe in sync with her anxious thoughts, Sarah had finally dared to open Michael's laptop. It was a moment she had been putting off, fearing the unknown. But with nothing else to occupy her mind, she had finally succumbed to the temptation of unlocking the device that might hold the key to everything. The screen flickered to life as she typed in the password she had memorized. It felt like a violation, but it was necessary. She had to understand why this had happened, why her life had been turned upside down. Why she couldn't just go back to being an ordinary wife and mother. As the desktop loaded, Sarah scanned through the files, but nothing immediately stood out. It was only when she opened the Documents folder that she saw it, a single file, buried at the bottom, simply titled Operation Eclipse. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew Michael had been involved in sensitive work, but the term Operation Eclipse was unlike anything she had heard before. Her fingers hovered over the mouse for a moment, then she clicked it open. The file was encrypted, its contents a jumbled mess of letters and numbers. It looked like some kind of code, but it was clearly important. Michael had been involved in something classified, something so secret that even the file name was shrouded in mystery. Sarah stared at the screen, frustration bubbling inside her. She wasn't equipped to decode a file like this. But she had to. She had to know what Michael had uncovered. The answer to the puzzle lay somewhere in that file, and with every passing minute, she felt herself sinking deeper into a web of secrecy that she could barely comprehend. She had been thrown into this world unwillingly, and now it seemed there was no escaping it. Suddenly, a soft knock at the door startled Sarah from her thoughts. Her heart raced. She hadn't expected anyone. She had been alone, isolated, with nothing but the trees outside for company. She approached the door cautiously, glancing through the small peephole. There, standing on the other side, was a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket, and his face was partially obscured by the shadows of the trees. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. Who was this man? Could he be one of Adam's contacts? Or was he someone else? Someone who had come to track her down. Her pulse quickened as she debated whether to open the door or stay hidden inside. But then she remembered Adam's warning, don't trust anyone who shows up. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked toward the door. Sarah hesitated. The weight of the decision was crushing. But she knew there was no other option. If she stayed, she might never see her daughter again. If she went, there was a chance, just a chance, that she could uncover the truth and bring justice for Michael. With a final glance at the cabin that had been her refuge, Sarah grabbed her bag and followed Jack into the unknown. The door closed behind her with a faint click, and the dark forest stretched ahead, its shadows a reflection of the danger that loomed over them both. As they walked away from the cabin, Sarah's mind raced. There were so many questions still unanswered. What was Operation Eclipse? What had Michael gotten himself mixed up in? And, most terrifying of all, who were these people who were willing to kill for it? For the first time since Michael's death, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she would uncover the truth. But as the night swallowed them whole, she couldn't shake the feeling that even greater dangers were waiting just around the corner. Sarah's heart raced as she followed Jack through the thickening forest. The darkness seemed to swallow them whole, the shadows long and ominous in the flickering light from the moon. Every crack of a twig beneath their feet felt like a warning, every rustling in the distance like a predator circling its prey. She wasn't sure how long they had been walking, but time seemed to slow down the deeper they ventured. It felt as if the very air had thickened, making it harder to breathe, as if something, or someone, was closing in on them. Jack didn't say much as they moved through the woods, his eyes scanning every corner, every movement in the trees. He was focused, alert, and Sarah couldn't help but feel like a fragile piece of glass in a world that was suddenly too harsh, too unforgiving. Her mind kept circling back to the file she had uncovered on Michael's laptop, the file that had led to this moment. What was Operation Eclipse? And why had it been hidden so carefully? What had her husband been involved in, and why hadn't he told her? Jack's voice broke through the silence, low and urgent. Stay close. We're almost there. The phrase felt like an echo in the night, and Sarah's stomach twisted. Her mind was a storm of unanswered questions, but Jack's words offered some comfort. Almost there. Where was there? What awaited her when they arrived? Would she find the answers she desperately needed, or would it lead to more confusion, more danger? They reached the edge of the forest, where a small, dilapidated cabin stood, hidden among the trees. It wasn't much, just a weathered wooden structure with peeling paint and broken windows, but something about it felt like a sanctuary. Jack approached the door, his movements quick and practiced. Sarah followed hesitantly, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her chest. Jack knocked twice, paused, then knocked again. The door creaked open slightly, and Sarah's eyes widened as she saw who was standing in the doorway. The man who greeted them was older, maybe in his late 40s, with a weathered face and intense eyes that seemed to assess every detail of Sarah's appearance in a split second. His hair was graying at the temples, and his posture was stiff, but there was a strength to him, an undeniable presence. "You must be Sarah," the man said, his voice gravelly but warm. "I'm Frank. Come in. We don't have much time." Sarah didn't hesitate. She stepped inside the cabin, her mind racing with questions. The interior was dark, but there were maps and files scattered across the table, and a large monitor glowing softly in the corner. This place was clearly not as it seemed, there was more going on here than a simple safe house. "Sit down," Frank said, motioning to a chair near the table. "Jack, you're going to have to fill her in." Sarah took a seat, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't understand what was happening, but she felt a pull, an urgency to know the truth. She needed to understand what her husband had been involved in. She needed to know why her life had turned into this whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. Jack stepped to the side and opened a folder on the table, revealing a set of documents. "We've been trying to uncover the truth for months," Jack began, his voice steady. "Operation Eclipse, it's bigger than anything we could have imagined. And Michael, well, he was the key." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Michael had been the key? How had he been involved in something so dangerous? Jack seemed to notice her shock, and he leaned in, his voice low. Michael had uncovered something the world wasn't supposed to know. And now, because of it, you're in danger. They're looking for you." "Who?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Who's looking for me?" Frank spoke then, his tone grim. "The people behind Operation Eclipse aren't just some rogue group. They have power, real power. They're connected to government officials, military contractors, people with influence. Michael wasn't just a soldier. He was part of something much larger, an operation that could change the balance of power in the world." Sarah's mind spun. She couldn't grasp it. Her husband, a man she had loved and trusted, had been part of something so monumental. What was it? Why had he kept it from her? Jack continued. "We've been tracking the operation for months, but it's not just about uncovering the truth. It's about stopping them before they can complete their plans. The stakes are much higher than we thought, Sarah. We need your help." "My help?" Sarah's voice cracked, but she refused to let the fear take over. "How could I possibly help? I don't know anything about this." "Don't underestimate yourself," Frank said. "You're already more involved than you think. Michael's death wasn't an accident. It was intentional. They knew what he was starting to uncover. And they're not going to stop until they silence everyone who knows anything. The weight of his words settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. She felt a wave of panic rising, but she pushed it back. This wasn't the time to fall apart. This was the time to fight, to uncover the truth, for Michael, for herself, and for Ella. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need you to look at the files," Jack said, his gaze sharp. "The ones Michael was working on. There's something in there that connects everything. If we can get that information, we can stop them. We can expose them for what they really are." The intensity in Jack's voice made Sarah's stomach churn. It was hard to believe that a simple file could hold the key to such a massive operation, but she knew better than to question them now. She had to trust them. She had no other choice. Frank stepped forward and handed her a USB drive. "This is what Michael left behind. It's everything we've been able to pull together so far. You need to go through it, piece by piece. We don't know what you'll find, but we know it's critical." Sarah took the drive in her hand, her fingers shaking as she held it. She couldn't help but wonder what was on it, what her husband had been working on in secret. What was so important that it had cost him his life? "I'll do it," she said, her voice firmer now. "I'll find out what happened to Michael. I'll stop them." Frank nodded. "Good. But be careful. They won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who stands in their way. If they realize we're onto them, they'll come after all of us." The reality of the situation began to sink in, and Sarah felt the weight of the responsibility pressing on her. She had always believed that her life was ordinary, that nothing extraordinary would ever happen to her. But now, she was caught in the middle of something that was bigger than she could ever have imagined. As the night wore on, Sarah sat at the table, going through the files on the USB drive. The more she uncovered, the more she realized the depth of Michael's involvement. He had been working on a mission, an operation that had the potential to change the course of history. But the more she dug, the more questions surfaced. There were names, dates, and locations, things that didn't make sense. But one thing became clear: Michael had known too much, and now, Sarah knew too much as well. The truth was within her reach. But as she dug deeper, she couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse was waiting for her on the other side of the information. Would uncovering the truth bring her the justice she sought, or would it lead to more heartbreak and danger? Only time would tell. But she couldn't stop now. Not when Michael's memory, and the lives of countless others, depended on it.